Well, AP Human Geography. Here we are again. Geez, maybe we're going to do all the rest of Unit 4 video notes. I hope not. This is not the best way of going about this. Although I suppose a little bit of advantage to you because, you can stop, you can pause, you can go use the bathroom, you can check your text, you can, you know. So this is where we finished up last time. Right? And so we're going to take you through the rest of some boundary business. We're going to look at the use of kind of control of territory when we consider the oceans and seas. And then I think we have time, because I'm going to do about 30 minutes here, to get into the next part of Unit 4, which gets us into the bigger topic of voting and elections and kind of how government is set up. And so you'll get a little civics lesson, or at least the beginning of one. Okay, this is where we finished up last time when going through all these different kinds of boundaries. And then we finished up with looking at 4 different types of boundary disputes. Okay, just going back to the fact that boundaries have been the cause of a lot of conflict and war, that sort of thing over time. So that's where we'll pick up from, and we're gonna um, wrap up this little section about boundaries, specifically about the influence of boundaries. Okay, so I'm going to start you off right here with E and 1. I think what part of this is talking about with number 1 is the idea that over time boundaries become part of a national identity. Most of you could probably close your eyes and visualize the basic outline shape of the United States of America, excluding Alaska and Hawaii, of course. But that shape, you know what I'm talking about. Little Florida hanging out there on the end, and all that business. I mean, it comes to be just the very shape of your country. It's part of the identity, and then over time, as nationalism has grown, as people's the population's identity with their country, that demand, that need to defend boundaries becomes all the more important. Again, I could kind of connect back to the ongoing um, you controversies and arguments about our own southern border, and or southern boundary, I guess I should call it. And I mean, you could use that as an example of just how ugly that debate can get. Okay, another way of looking at boundaries is cooperation. The European Union was formed up back in the 90s, and has brought most of the major European countries, England being the big standout. Those of you that pay attention to the news know a few years back, I guess it's a little more than a few years back, the British exited from the European Union, what can be known as Brexit, as Britain gets out. But the rest of Europe does have this connection to each other. And as a lot of historians will point out, I mean, when you look at the history of Europe, oh my goodness, I mean, it is just conflict stacked on top of conflict on top of conflict. And when we look at what has taken the place of all of that, and as the European Union has really replaced cooperation with conflict, historians will say that you're looking in Europe right now at the most peaceful stretch of time um, in the last 7 centuries. Okay, I mean, you can march it back that far. Now, depending on whether we're not really at a place right now where we consider the war with Ukraine to be a European war, but that's definitely created the biggest disruption to this peace in Europe. But then again, Ukraine's not part of the European Union. So again, take that for however you want it. We can talk about division, and when we talk about like a multi-state example, like the Koreas. I mean, those two sides are becoming more and more stark in terms of their differences. South Korea having strong connections to the United States and the West, a democratic government where they elect their leaders, that sort of thing. And then North Korea, a very, very isolated country that has political connections with very few other countries of the world. Um, Led by a, what by all accounts, I don't know if we're going to describe him, but as a dictator. Um, and what we understand from, it's very difficult to get into North Korea, um, and for what we understand, a population that lives in poverty, and in a country just that acts very threatening to the rest of the world. Um, that's what that division has by that boundary, separating North and South, is what it's created. Just in the last week, um, hold on here, I had a dog trying to get my attention. As far as today's attendance question, that's who's keeping me warm. Little Murphy here. Anyhow, as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted by the pub. Kim Jong-un, who is the dictator you see pictured there, the leader of North Korea, just earlier this week announced that he sees zero chance for any kind of reconciliation or any kind of a relationship with South Korea. Basically, just kind of underlining the fact that that North Korea has no plans in the near or distant future to try to normalize their relationship with South Korea, and that conflict is going to be what it's going to be. All right, so that's your role of division, and then I'll throw in the role of pandemic. Because we really saw boundaries brought into really sharp focus during the COVID pandemic. We saw countries that many countries that closed their borders, and were not allowing people to travel from country to country for fear that that they were going to be bringing some new strain of the pandemic or anything like that. And so we see that happen frequently through history, where there's the basic idea of fear itself, and sometimes it is, whether it's fear of disease, whether it is fear of terrorism, things like that can definitely come into play. All right, okay, we'll leave that behind, and now we're going to focus this last little section before we like I said, make our shift into civics, and take a look at the law of the seas, and that really is the question to be answered there. You've got all these oceans, you got all these seas. Does that water belong to someone? Does that water belong to specific countries? How does that all work? And so that's where we're going to get all this answered for you. I know you guys have done a little bit of work with it already, and so you're familiar. So I'll just give you my run through, just so we have the chance to kind of, chat about that a bit. All right. Again, more definitions here. And the first one, what we refer to as territorial seas, and that is this basic idea that any state, okay, including for example the United States, controls waters 12 nautical miles. That's what the NM stands for, nautical miles. And a nautical mile, by the way, they use degrees to measure nautical miles, not the same as the way we measure them on land. A nautical mile is equal to about 1.15 miles, land miles. Okay, so it's a little bit longer than what we think of as miles. So take that all together. 12, so you're probably thinking about 13-ish, land miles off the coast of the United States, Pacific, Atlantic, down in the Gulf, all of that. We have what we call state control over that. And that means that really we can do pretty much what we want with those waters. We do allow commercial ships from other countries to travel basically unimpeded in our territorial seas. That's how we do business. That's how we get goods from other countries. And so when it comes to non-commercial ships, we have a right if we want to stop those ships and ask what their business is in our waters. And and high on that list of non-commercial would be military. Okay, yeah, you see a military ship from another country that's in your territorial seas. You can, I'm not going to say you consider it an act of war, but that's there's something wrong there, and that's considered a major no-no. I mean, either you have navigational systems that have gone seriously haywire and it's an innocent mistake, or another state is trying to make a statement by traveling into the territorial seas of another. Okay, so that's territorial. Contiguous zone. All right. And so, like I say there, hey, got this nice little, this helps us too right here. Contiguous zone, limited state control, yes. And so now we're 24 nautical miles off the coast. And on this one, again, we don't have the very strict kind of control that we can have under territorial seas, but we still have the right within the contiguous zone to enforce our laws. And so if there are any kind of ships, boats, anything like that that are approaching and cross into our contiguous zone that possibly we have suspicion that may be carrying immigrants who are trying to illegally enter the country, or maybe carrying narcotics that are trying to be smuggled into the United States, that kind of a thing, then we have a right to stop those boats, those ships, if we have a suspicion that something might be up. Okay. And that's kind of from that 12 nautical miles out, to the 24 nautical miles is where we see the contiguous zone. And so, like I said, we don't have the same level of control we have over our territorial seas, but still we get to enforce our laws in the contiguous zone. That's, to me, kind of definitely a way of remembering it. All right. And then the exclusive economic zone, I didn't put the miles in there. Oh, well, this is about this is 200 nautical miles off the coast of a state. Okay. And bottom line, what my description there says is that that the state controls the resources that lie within that EEZ. A lot of times, those resources are going to be fishing. Okay, that's going to be a big one. But it can also mean under oil that is being drilled under the under the bedrock underneath the I'm trying to remember the ocean bed. There we go. Where a lot of oil is drilled from, and that would give that one state control. No other countries can move in and try to edge in on that oil, or legally to be fishing. And again, this is another one that does end up with some conflicts, especially on the fishing side. A little bit more kind of hard to sneak into another country's EEZ and start drilling oil. That's a major operation. But the fishing one happens all the time, and it's not that unusual to hear one state warning another. That we're having to chase off more and more fishermen from your country who are drifting into our EEZ. Okay, so that is that one. And then everything beyond the EEZ is what are just called the high seas. Okay, and that pretty much the idea is that it's freedom of the seas. Anyone can travel. There's no restrictions. That kind of a thing. All right. All right, as I've been kind of alluding to as we go through here, yes, sea access has been at the root of many, many, many wars and conflicts over the years. The example I give you goes back to back in the good old days. I think when I was I think it was early '80s when I was still in high school. Libya and the United States were having a lot of issues back then. Libya was a country that was sponsoring a fair amount of terrorism that was taking place in various parts of the world. The United States was trying to keep a lid on it, and it brought our two countries kind of head to head. Oh, hold on, got a dog out. Oh, I keep trying to explain to Murphy that if I can't get my work done, I don't get paid. If I don't get paid, he doesn't get all this fancy food that he expects. Let's see if we can keep him under control. Anyhow, um, back to Libya. The leader of Libya back there in the early 80s, I think it was 1981, was Muammar Gaddafi, kind of a, yeah, one of those kind of dictator-ish kind of guys. And he established north of Libya, you look on the map where they're on the right side, what he called the line of death. And it went beyond the 200 miles of the EEZ. He pretty much was just kind of by himself saying, "No, I'm just going to claim all of this chunk of the Mediterranean and call it mine." And the United States was right there to say, Muammar, you can't do that, and to show that we were not going to respect his line of death, we started patrolling the seas and the skies above, and ended up having a brief military conflict. Well, not really anything we'd confuse with a war. Some of our fighters shot down some of their fighter jets, and after a while, Gaddafi pulled in his horns. So you have that kind of thing in the South China Sea right now. Is one of the more tense parts of the world. China has to try to this is kind of ingenious, in an evil sort of way, but to increase the amount of EEZ space that they have in the South China Sea, which is really, really big on the whole fishing industry. China has begun to build artificial islands. And then once they build that island, they can establish 200 miles around it. Because even if you're an island state or an island country, or that 200 miles around the island, that's your EEZ. And so that's been China's solution. Is if we want to control more of the South China Sea, then we just start dropping these artificial islands that we build, and that's one that whether you call it the United, whether it's the UN, we haven't decided, what do we do about that? Because if that's the theory, you could just start dropping those everywhere. Anyhow, that just adds to the tension that's going on over there between China, Vietnam, the Philippines, all these countries that make use of the South China Sea for fishing, huge parts of their economies, and just the fight over, again, basically whose water is it? Okay. All right. And then choke points, one of our definitional terms that really comes into play when we talk about these conflicts and tensions that come out of the use of the seas. And technically, a choke point can describe both either water or land. And you've got your definition. I think you have a definition on your vocab sheet as well, I believe. And this is usually where you have these narrow stretches of land or water that it's really easy to cut off. And usually these narrow ways are used, like it says there, for a lot of trade to go through. Maybe it's a valley and there's really rugged mountains around it, and so that's the only way you can get goods through a mountain range. Or when it comes to waterways, you're talking about straits, canals, that kind of thing, and really, really important to trade. And then it talks about state defense there as well. Couple examples that I will give you. If I'm looking at my map over here, I should make that map bigger. I don't know why it went so tiny on it. But this big red thing you see right here, I think that's indicating the Strait of Hormuz. And that is located on the Persian Gulf. And this is where a lot of our oil tankers, and well, ours and a lot of other countries, oil tankers come in and out of to purchase oil from Middle Eastern countries, and then they go through the Strait of Hormuz to then head on off to their other locations wherever they're going to. There have been times, and even just in the last 30, 40 years, where some of the conflict in the Middle East has threatened the Strait of Hormuz, where there's been attempts to close it, that sort of thing, which then threatens our access to the natural resources we need to, gas up our cars and our planes and, that sort of thing, okay? In that same general area of the world, you have the Suez Canal, that opens up into the Mediterranean, and another choke point. All right, and so these can also be flashpoints to conflict, and both with Suez and the Strait of Hormuz. Um, those are both examples where there have been military action and or wars. There was actually a short little war fought back in the 1950s around the Suez Canal and that access point. Okay, but we call them choke points in effect because if they're blocked, yeah, it kind of chokes things up, right? Okay, and that's where we make our big shifting of the gear. Seems like it should be a whole nother section, but I guess it's not going to be. But moving on into kind of well, where we defined an internal boundary, and so getting back to this idea that, hey, all right, here's where we go with boundaries that we don't think about. Okay, they're drawn on specific, very very detailed maps of like Washington State, but they're not the kind of boundaries. When people ask you where you live, you don't rattle off your voting district. Which, by the way, if you live in the Vancouver area, most of you are in the 49th district as far as Washington State representation goes. And then pretty much all of you, whether you live in Vancouver or out in Camas or Washougal or where you may be, you're part of the 3rd congressional district as far as Washington State representation federally back in Washington, D.C. So most of you probably 49th for state district. So I might have a few of you that are 17th or 18th district, but I think most of you 49th. But everyone would be a 3rd district, congressional district for U.S. representation. So again, it's a civics lesson, okay? When we talk about these voting districts, this is what makes up really the foundations. And I'm just going to keep kind of moving along here. As a representative government as we have, there has to be a way of organizing that representation so that we just don't have complete chaos. And that is where the districts come from. It's this ability or this effort to create a system that allows for everyone to be represented and to have their voice heard when it comes to elections. When we determine voting districts and then like how many representatives we have for each of those voting districts, it either goes to our state legislature or goes to Congress in Washington, D.C. That is all. When we're talking about House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., and then the same, the House in our Senate, or in our, the House in our state government, that is all based on population. Okay, when it comes, some of you may remember if you learned about some little bit of U.S. government back in middle school, that in our U.S. Senate and in our state Senate, that's a set number. Doesn't matter how much population there is. Washington sends 2 senators to Washington D.C. to represent our state, and that's pretty much is the rule. We look at a Senate of 100 senators, each state sending 2. But when it comes to the House of Representatives, that is totally based on population. Okay, right now we're a little over 400 representatives. But where those representatives comes from is always in flux. It's kind of always changing. And so where we determine that change is from the census. And the census is every 10 years here in the United States. And it's on the tens. The last one we did was 2020. We try to do a head count of every last man, woman, and child in the country. Now, obviously, babies are continually being born every day, so it's never going to be dead on exact. But it gives an updated number every 10 years as to how many people live in each voting district. And if that population is growing when it comes to, again, House of Representatives, you may gain representatives as your population is growing. If your population is decreasing, you could lose representation based on that. So the census is really important when it comes to, boom, well, what you got there for number 3? All right, really important for determining your level of representation. All right, and there's a map that kind of shows those state districts for representation in Olympia when we're making our state laws, all that kind of business. All right. Um, yeah, that's the critical importance of the census, and and like I said, and again, and when we had the 2020 census, I mean, things got a little spicy at times. Talking about some parts of the country that seem to be undercounted at times. Questions about that unfortunately in the United States we have this growing homeless population. Are they being properly counted? When it comes to citizens who are not here legally. Well, I can't call them citizens when there are people who are here not legally. How are they being counted? Should they be counted? All of those kinds of questions come into play, politically speaking, when it comes to the census, where that can get a little bit sticky. I mean, it seems simple enough on the surface, right? Go and count everyone. Well, then you start getting into the weeds, and yeah. All right. But it's important that we get as accurate a count as we can because that representation is dependent on it. And we hate to think that we have any parts of our country that are either being overrepresented or underrepresented because of bad census numbers. All right. And so that kind of gets to number 4. Reapportionment is the legal term, the political term we use when you either gain or lose representatives based on new census numbers. Okay. Again, if you show a big increase in population, that may lead to you being able to add another representative. But the inverse of that works as well. And then sometimes redistricting is the idea of going in and drawing new district lines. And we'll talk a little bit when we get into gerrymandering and all that stuff as to why that happens sometimes. A lot of times it is going to be a reflection of kind of a changing population and the fact that sometimes you may have a part of a state, and I'm saying small s state, that begins to decrease in population. And so it might be advantageous to change the boundaries of the actual district itself. So again, you look back over here to our map of Washington State. Redistricting would mean taking any of these that you see on there with the numerical representations and changing the shape, the size of it, that kind of thing. That's redistricting. Okay. And well, there's that word I just mentioned, gerrymandering. You have your definition of gerrymandering there. So it's named after, it was a vice president way back in the old days. We're talking like 1812. His name was Elbridge Gerry. And he, at one point, when he was before he became vice president, when he was serving as governor of Massachusetts, he had signed off on a law that created this map of the voting districts in Massachusetts that was drawn in such a way as to give his political party an automatic advantage. It kind of isolated opposition party into small areas of the state, and the shape of it, the kind of contortions that they created to do this, to give advantage, kind of took on the shape of a salamander. And so you slam together his name and salamander, and that's where you get gerrymandering. Okay. And it technically is illegal. There's numerous cases even right now in front of courts around the country that where someone is challenging a map in a state and saying that the voting districts have been drawn up in a way that advantages one political party over another. If you look at my little example here, it shows you that, if this is what you were looking at, and just on its face, you would say, okay, well, there's not a lot of red there and a lot more blue. It's kind of that 60-40 split. But as you can jump over here and see, if you draw your district lines like this, you can actually isolate your opposition to a point, and it's just and you know both of these models here are using 5 districts, but are able to create kind of this contorted map where actually the 40% wins. Okay, so they might not have a majority, but by doing so, they are able to create a majority. And we'll do a little exercise in class to give you a better visualization of what gerrymandering is and how it works. Um, but it's one of those kind of political tricks that's been around since almost the beginning of the United States, and you know, like I said, it's not legal, and so always kind of a political hot potato. All right. Um, I need to shift gears in a totally different direction, but we're also at 30 minutes. So I think I'm going to go ahead and, you know, hit the brakes. Okay. We'll call this good. You make sure you have this in your notebooks, and we'll pick it up again when we are together, whenever that may be. All right. Okay, guys, stay safe, stay warm, and hope to see you soon. Bye.